So the scene at Stewart-Haas Racing right now is a lot like the Titanic. The happy, joyful music has been replaced with screams and chaos, which in this case is a quiet panic in terms of SHR. Drivers, engineers, and even the marketing directors are scrambling for the lifeboats. There are other mighty ships in the Cup Series like Front Row, Trackhouse, 2311, and maybe even a Gibbs or Hendrick that will swoop them up. Others will drown, kicking and screaming until their NASCAR careers perish. Everyone is sad about the demise of SHR except that one former SHR employee that's now RFK. He's ready to throw shade at everyone once all of this comes to fruition. Stewart-Haas Racing was one of the few organizations that could actually compete and beat Hendrick Motorsports and Joe Gibbs Racing, which makes it even more insane that 6 years removed from their epic 2018 season where their 4 cars alone were able to be faster than an entire pack at Talladega, that organization casually just kept going down a notch from for the lead to forever to forward to now for sale. In a few months, SHR is only going to be remembered in the history books, and if they build a Titanic-like exhibit for Stewart-Haas like they have in Branson. Okay, political incorrectness aside, it is tragic to see the downfall of Stewart-Haas Racing. There are a lot of similarities between the downfall of Stewart-Haas Racing and the downfall of another credible race team, Robert Yates Racing. These were two organizations that held on to the things that made them successful. So it's pretty obvious what the issue was with Stewart-Harvick Racing. It didn't matter if SHR was putting 4 cars in the round of 8 or short of horsepower, the 2014 champion was always that leading battlehawk for SHR. Out of the 10 seasons Harvick was there, 2016 and 2022 were the only years where he had some serious competition for the SHR torchbearer. Plus, out of the 50 NASCAR Cup Series wins in the Kevin Harvick era, the 10, 14, and 41 contributed to just 13 of those wins. Yeah, no wonder there's a reason why people always joke about Kevin Harvick having back problems. He was the elite level talent that was that #1 guy at Stewart-Haas and often carried this entire organization to relevance. Meanwhile, for Robert Yates Racing, they were the NASCAR equivalent of the 97-year-old diner that served Coke the old-fashioned way. Robert Yates thrived with 2 horses, the number 88 with Dale Jarrett and the 28 with talent like Ernie Irvan and Ricky Rudd. In 2003, Robert Yates had the opportunity to expand to a 3-car team. Ricky Rudd in the Havoline 28, Elliott Sadler in the M&M's 38, and Dale Jarrett in the UPS number 88. In the era of superpowers like Hendrick, Joe Gibbs, and Roush, Robert Yates could have easily been the 4th. Instead, they would give Rudd and Havoline the pink slip. Allegedly, Rudd's number 28 team with Michael McSwain was promised to M&M's. Robert Yates also believed that he didn't have the capacity to field 3 competitive Cup cars. Whereas Stewart-Haas clinged on to Kevin Harvick, Robert Yates clinged on to having a 2-car team, preferring to do things how they've always been done. Ultimately, letting a driver like Ricky Rudd leave was a mistake Yates would pay for in the long haul. Since the 1995 season, Robert Yates Racing had a streak of placing at least 1 car in the top 10 in points. In 2003, the first year after they let go of Ricky Rudd, Elliott Sadler and Dale Jarrett didn't even crack the top 20. The second thing that connects Stewart-Haas's downfall to Robert Yates Racing is that they lost their advantages as Cup teams. You could make an argument that it was NASCAR that killed Stewart-Haas Racing. Their 2020's pursuit to increase parity in the field came at the expense of one of their superpowers. One race team's got to win a lot less races, and that team was Stewart-Haas Racing. Whether it was the wheel well templates, the parts freezes, and the next-gen car itself, Stewart-Haas Racing was put well outside of its wheelhouse. Since their dominant 2020 season, Stewart-Haas has only won 4 races. While some of it was on NASCAR, some of it was also on Stewart-Haas Racing for not stepping up and learning these things. Stewart-Haas Racing was often put in the box to where they would try things like putting illegal NACA ducts on the 14 and other things that would get them penalized. One thing a lot of people aren't talking about with the downfall of SHR is the penalties, because they got hit hard by NASCAR. Case in point, Chase Briscoe's penalty was one of the worst in NASCAR history. Meanwhile, for Robert Yates Racing, they didn't just let in other teams on their secret. During the 2000s, Robert Yates would give the Roush teams access to a lot of their engines and some of the data. This was the thing that caused the power shift at Ford to where Roush Racing was going up and Yates Racing was going down. Oh yeah, not to mention that the Yates engineering program was straight from the 1960s. I seriously wonder what the shop culture was like at Robert Yates Racing. Did they drink root beer floats? Did they watch black and white movies and listen to Elvis while they were working in the shop? Just curious. So once SHR and Yates struggled with their familiar ways, they finally started to look towards solutions. Tony Stewart is the closest thing to a Kyle Larson superfan, and he envisioned Kyle Larson being the one to carry SHR on his back. Which, this is extremely thoughtful of Tony Stewart, because Kyle Larson's not that tall, so statistically, he is less likely than Kevin Harvick to have back problems. However, Ford did not approve of Larson going to SHR after Larson boldly said a racial slur to lose his ride at Ganassi. I also want to look at 2016, as Kyle Larson's name came up quite a bit when Tony Stewart announced his retirement from Cup racing in 2016. However, they instead chose the steady Eddie Clint Bowyer over a Kyle Larson in development. Their inability to have that one generational talent really haunted SHR. Although it wasn't just Kyle Larson, there were other drivers that could have materialized into something. They had Daniel Suarez for a year until Gene Haas chased him out the door by threatening to hit him with his piñata bat. Then SHR lost the Kyle Busch sweepstakes to a team that hasn't won a championship in almost 3 decades. Instead, they put too much faith in Chase Briscoe, Ryan Preece, Josh Berry, and Cole Custer. These were drivers that had the potential and still have the potential. However, they were not or are not yet top-tier Cup Series talents. The lack of driver talent was something that also plagued Robert Yates, as he noticed as his team started winning less races, and that meant that there would be less dance parties where all the people in the shop would do the twist. Robert Yates put a lot of faith into David Gilliland. He won 1 Busch Series race, and all of a sudden he's a Cup driver now. He was put into that situation because Yates did not have a strong pool of prospects. That was until they brought in Eddie DeHaan as GM, but then they made the stupid decision by firing him, meaning that Eddie DeHaan then took his ARCA team and his driver development program with him. Gilliland was no top Busch Series prospect, plus an aging Ricky Rudd that was past his prime was no Mark Martin. Back in the 2007 NASCAR silly season, Mark Martin was the leading candidate to replace Dale Jarrett at Robert Yates Racing. So there were 2 reasons as to why this move made sense. Number 1, Mark Martin could help rebuild this organization and get them back on track. And number 2, Mark Martin might have not been a vending machine guy. By going to Robert Yates Racing, he could now get a glass of water, grab the old Coke syrup packets, pour it in, and mix it. That's how he would drink his sodas at Robert Yates. Well, Robert Yates ended up losing the sweepstakes to Bobby Ginn, one of the least credible owners in the garage and an empire that would crumble faster than Yates. So when you're a race team and you don't run up front, especially if you're a team that was once a powerhouse, you're gonna have a bad reputation. In those last couple of years, Stewart-Haas had a lot of PR because not only were the teams running bad, but they were getting penalty after penalty after penalty. Is it really a surprise that Anheuser-Busch and Smithfield left ship? Meanwhile, Robert Yates Racing had the reputation of being a fossil in the NASCAR Cup Series garage. And I'm sure if you asked a couple people that worked on the cars at the time, they probably thought that Johnny Carson still hosted late night. So in this case, it really wasn't a surprise that UPS decided to drive away from Robert Yates in that big brown truck. If Dale Jarrett wanted to go to Michael Waltrip Racing, they would just ship their paychecks via UPS to the doorsteps of MWR. Then they lost the Mars Company in 2007 because they wanted to win races. Now, while the people at the shop didn't have to worry about cavities, now Robert Yates and that entire team had to worry about if the team was even going to have the funds necessary to compete. So by then, it was clear that Stewart-Haas as well as Robert Yates had hit the iceberg. I find it ironic that the last driver for Stewart-Haas and Yates respectively both showed a lot of great pace as young drivers for an organization that was starting to sink. We all know about Noah Gragson showing great pace with Stewart-Haas Racing this year. Going back to 2008, a lot of people forget that Travis Quaffle was that guy for Robert Yates Racing. Much like Noah Gragson, Travis Quaffle got a top 10 at Las Vegas, one of the true surprise runs of his season. Ultimately, Travis Quaffle was a driver that really punched above his weight class, especially with all the financial insecurities and performance issues of Yates Racing. Although, if there is a difference between these two drivers, it sounds like Gragson is going to land on his feet, likely with RCR or even a team like Trackhouse. So, to wrap things up, it's sad and unfortunate that Stewart-Haas Racing is closing its doors. It's gotta be hard for some of those Tony Stewart fans that don't have a connection. However, this is just a part of racing. At the blink of an eye, you can go from winning races and championships to closing operations. Like Robert Yates Racing, the downfall of Stewart-Haas Racing is surprising. And it's going to suck not seeing a SHR number 4 or 14 car in 2025, like it sucked not seeing a Robert Yates number 28 or number 38 in 2010. So if you guys enjoyed this video, there's other full tank NASCAR content on Fuel Cell Full. Also stay tuned to NRF Productions, as this is a home race and I've got some great content coming out this weekend. Other than that, this is Nathan for Digital Gas House. Life's a beach, and then you drive.